950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for another episode of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Thanks for listening to the show. If you have questions or a comment, email them to comment@am950radio.com, and I'll answer them on the air. So before we get started today, I'm going to throw it to Brett here to talk about the watch party again for the vice presidential debate. So go ahead, Brett.
Absolutely. Hopefully you're able to join us for our vice presidential debate watching party. I was at least making the comment to you. Not sure if you agree, but I think this is the biggest VP debate we've probably had since the old Biden versus Sarah Palin debate. Would you kind of agree with that too, you think?
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the how many are going to watch it, because, I actually think, lots of times people don't really vote based on the vice president, but I think this case might be different since Trump is so old and Vance is such a doofus.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe him. And Walz is such a likable guy that seems to really have taken the nation by storm. So I'm interested in seeing this debate, and you can come watch it with us as well. Coming up next Tuesday, that is October 1st, we are going to be over at the Park Tavern doing a live broadcast and then debate watch party. Basically, it'll work this way. The doors are opening at 6 o'clock over at the Park Tavern. Matt McNeil will be doing a live broadcast with other AM 950 personalities at 7 o'clock, including, I believe, Philip Anthony will be out there. Same with Greg Bakken. Bruce, you're going to be out there too, so you'll probably jump on the air with Matt. That'll be from 7 until 8. The debate itself is at 8 o'clock, and that's where we'll have that displayed on all the TVs in the party room we will be at the Park Tavern. So make sure you stop on out. We'll have appetizers, and if you want a bigger meal, you can order from the Park Tavern's delicious menu for a full meal. Tickets are $25 in advance. You can get them at the door, but it'll cost you a little bit more money at $30. So I would recommend ordering those ahead of time, am950radio.com. Get them while you can, $25. am950radio.com for the VP Debate Watch Party coming up on Tuesday, October 1st. That's this coming Tuesday.
And the Park Tavern is located where, Brett?
Yeah, it's located in St. Louis Park, basically off Highway 7 and Louisiana Avenue, just in that area. So if you know the St. Louis Park area, you'll be able to find the Park Tavern there. Otherwise, give it a Google, and if you can't do that, you can always call us here at the station, and we can help you out.
All right, thanks, Brett. Yeah, I'm going to be out there. I was at the first presidential debate. It sounds like it might be the only one. And I mean, it was a really good time. So I hopefully this one will be too. So come on out and join us for a good time. So I'm going to talk more about the Constitution, of course. This is our continuing series of walking through the Constitution here. And last time I finished with Article 1, which was on the legislative branch or Congress. So today I'm going to start with go through Article 2, which is on the executive branch or the presidency. So even though it's called the executive branch, most of what's in the Constitution deals with the presidency. Since the president is the head of the executive branch of government. So Section 1, again, these are broken down, and just like they are in Article 1, you got sections and then you got clauses after that. So that's when I refer to sections and clauses, it's in Article 2. So Section 1, Clause 1 is where the president and vice president are elected for 4-year terms. Now, initially there was no term limits in the Constitution. The 22nd Amendment, which was ratified in 1951 after FDR won 4 elections, that's when the term limits came in. But before that, there wasn't any. So presidents, if they wanted to, could serve more than 2 terms. But they basically honored the tradition that George Washington started, where he quit after 2 terms. He actually really wanted to quit after the first term, but he got talked into staying for another term. But he started a tradition, and the presidents who won 2 elections could they did the same thing where they stepped away after 2 terms. So there wasn't any term limits initially. So under the 22nd Amendment, you could actually, if you're start out as the vice president, and then something happens to the president. So let's say 2 years in, the president dies. Okay, the vice president would serve the remaining 2 years of that term, and then they could run 2 more times. So they could actually serve up to 10 years if they were reelected twice. So you can theoretically at least serve more than 8 years, actually, if you start out as the vice president and then take over as president at some point. But so now we have the 2-year or 2-term limit, so you got an 8-year total, and as Trump is trying to do, it's not 8 consecutive years. I mean, you can run, serve 4 years, lose, and then win again at some point. So there's been Grover Cleveland did that back in our history in the 80s or 90s, back in that time frame. So it has happened. So that's Clause 1 of Section 1. Sets the 2-term limits of 4 years each. Clause 2 is about the Electoral College, which is, this is the entity that actually votes for the president. Now, it's kind of based on how the votes are counted from the state level, but this is the entity that actually votes for the president. Right? And the Electoral College only covers the presidential election, so sometimes people think it covers other things. No, it doesn't. It's just the presidential election. So right now, each state gets the number of House members that they have in the House of Representatives at the federal level, and 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators. So you add those 2 numbers together, that's how many electors that each state gets in the Electoral College. So Minnesota has 10 because we have 8 representatives, at least at this point we do. We've come close to losing one. But we still have 8 in the House. We have, of course, 2 in the Senate, so we have a total of 10 electors. So California leads the country. They have 55. And then Texas is next with 38. No surprise there, though. They're basically the 2 biggest states. And then New York and Florida each have 29 at this point. So they lead in the Electoral College. And then we have like North Dakota and South Dakota, and I think Montana and Maine and Wyoming, I believe. They have 3. So they have the smallest. So they have the 2 senators, and then they have 1 representative covers their whole state because of the population is so small. So they only have 3. So, but one other thing in Clause 2 is that if you are a federal officer, like if you are in the Senate or in the House or a federal judge or something like that, you cannot be an elector in the Electoral College. So these are, if you're somehow an officer of the federal government, you can't be there in the Electoral College. So Clause 3 now is, this is the long version, or the longest one probably in this article, where this is the process of the Electoral College and how it actually works. Now, I'm not going to go through all the details here, so I'm going to summarize it a little bit here, but it is kind of complicated, but here's the highlights at least. So initially, the Electoral College worked where, whoever got the most votes was the president, and whoever got the most votes, second most votes, was the vice president. Well, predictably, they ran into a problem with this in 1800, where Jefferson and Aaron Burr as vice president, of course, they got the same number of votes. So it got thrown to the House, and the House ended up picking Jefferson over Burr. So this process was modified by the 12th Amendment in the election of 1804, so that took care of that, where now the president and the vice president are separate ballots. So whoever gets the most for president gets president, and then, presumably their vice presidential person is going to, in a separate ballot, gets to be vice president. So right now, there are 538 Electoral College votes. So there's 435 people in the House. There's 100 people in the Senate. You add those, you get 535. And then Washington, D.C. gets 3 electoral votes. So on an earlier episode, I talked about how the federal government controls Washington, D.C. Well, they have given Washington, D.C. 3 electoral votes. So that brings the total to 538. So you need 270 to win. That's the majority number. So that's why you hear all the people talking about how to get to 270. That's what they're talking about. So this year you need to get to 270 to win the Electoral College. If not, so let's say Harris and Trump run, neither of them gets to 270, then it goes to the House of Representatives. where each state gets one vote. And right now, the Republicans have more states in the House than the Democrats do. So if it goes there, the House of Representatives is likely to give it to Trump rather than Harris, even if Harris wins the popular vote. So this is why we got to get out and vote, right? We can't let this go to the House. So all you need in the House is a majority, of the states. So since the Republicans have more states, you know how they're going to vote. So that's, in a nutshell, the process in the Electoral College. There's a little bit more in Clause 4, which sets the time for the elections of the members of the Electoral College. So the Constitution gives that power to Congress to set, and Congress has set the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Every 4 years, every year we vote for the president to choose the members. So each state has their own elections for the Electoral College members. However, the state law says it's done. Then the Electoral College members vote on the Monday after the second Wednesday in December. So, after the election results are in, hopefully, the Electoral College members then vote. And then on January 6th is when the results are supposed to be certified. So this is why in January 6th of 2021, the insurrection happened, because they were trying to stop the Congress from certifying the results of the Electoral College. So that's kind of how it's set up for voting. So there's been people talking about, well, let's get rid of the Electoral College. This doesn't make sense. The loser of the popular vote can actually be the president. And, why is it set up by states when, shouldn't it just be majority, whoever gets the most votes nationally wins? Well, if you wanted to do that way, you got to, amend the Constitution, which I'll talk about, in a later show, but that's hard to do because you need 3/4 of the states to ratify that proposed amendment. And, right now that isn't going to happen. So what's going on is an interstate compact where and these are typically the Democratic states, join together, they pass laws in their state legislature saying, we are going to change our Electoral College system where, normally it's whoever wins the majority in that state gets those Electoral College votes. So the proposal is to change that to whoever wins the most votes nationally gets all of the Electoral College votes from that state. So there's an interstate compact going around to try and get to that 270 votes. So if let's just assume that they did this, somebody will sue, it'll go to the Supreme Court, and if the current Supreme Court is around or, something similar to it, I wouldn't count on the Supreme Court allowing this to happen. But it's something that's being done. So I did check this the other day, and right now they're up to 209 votes. So they still got a little ways to go to 270. Minnesota is one of those states who has done this, by the way. So there's been 17 states so far, and the District of Columbia has done it too. So we'll see how that turns out. But I suspect that'll go to the Supreme Court, and they'll have to make some decision on that. So moving on to Clause 5, this is the very few qualifications to be president. There are 3. A natural-born citizen, 35 years old, and 14 years a resident of the United States. So if I wanted to, I could run for president. So you'll see, when you vote in 2024 here, there's going to be a lot of people running for president that you never heard of. That's because it takes very few qualifications to run for president. So notice there's nothing in there about, experience. So this is how, Trump was able to run and win, because he satisfied those requirements. So there's been some talk about, well, we should make have some cognitive tests and all that sort of thing. But again, you'd have to amend the Constitution probably to do that. So I don't think that's going to happen either. So Clause 6 is where the vice president takes over if something happens to the president, so he can't do the job. And the 25th Amendment kind of comes into play here, where If the vice president takes over, then Congress elects a new vice president to take place of the vice president moving up to the president. Now, a president can temporarily step down for some reasons, and this happens fairly frequently where they, if they have some medical procedure that they do, for example, that's one of the more common ones. They turn the power over to the vice president for a short period of time, and then when they're, better, they take over again. So that happens periodically. The 25th Amendment, however, adds something to this where they allow if the vice president and a majority of the cabinet believes that the president can't carry out his or her duties, then they got to notify Congress. So there was some talk about, Trump during his presidency of this happening, but it never did. But if it did happen, if Congress is notified by the vice president and the majority of the cabinet, then the vice president takes over. And then the president can later say, well, I'm better now, so I'm going to come back. And if the vice president and the cabinet agree with that, well, then he's back in power. But if they don't, then 2/3 of Congress has to vote within 3 weeks period of time to basically who's the president going to be. So, there was talk of that with Trump, but that's never happened as far as I can recall in our system. But that's what the 25th Amendment. When you talk about the 25th Amendment, that's what they're talking about. So Clause 7 is about the president's salary, which is currently $400,000. Plus, they have some various expense accounts with $169,000 total up in there. Now, I suspect there's other ways they can get money too, but that's the basics. So the presidents aren't really doing this to make money. It's the power thing why they're doing this, but that's what they get paid right now. And then finally, Clause 8 is the oath of office that they take at the inauguration on January 20th. So if Harris wins, and let's hope she does, she's going to take an oath of office that is written in the Constitution on January 20th. So that's the end of Section 1 for Article 2 on the presidency. So we'll continue on with that next week. So these next two sections I'm going to be talking about politics. So we'll talk to you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for another segment of Politics Matters. How civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. So these next two segments are going to be about politics. I mean, after all, the election's coming up. There's just so much stuff going on in the political world. So, of course, I was reading through some stuff last night and come to learn that Tom Emmer, he's the congressional member from the 6th District, so that's up by the St. Cloud area, is going to play Tim Walz in prepping JD Vance for the debate on October 1st. And my first reaction to this was, really? Tom Emmer, like, when you think of, guys who can think on their feet or give a good speech, Tom Emmer does not come to mind. Especially, given how he tried to become Speaker of the House, and Trump spoke out against him, and then he dutifully, took the knee and said, okay, I'm not going to run. But anyway, like, really? Tom Emmer. Good luck with that. But, Emmer is actually third in line in the House of Representatives. He's the majority whip. And that's basically the person who, in the majority party, so the Republicans, at least right now, have the majority in the House. And he's the guy who goes around to make sure they got enough votes to pass stuff that they're voting on in the House of Representatives. So, of course, on Wednesday, the attempt to prevent a government shutdown didn't work. So that didn't go so well there, did it, Tom? So I don't know if he knew that was going to lose or if he was surprised by that. But it went down. But they're going to have another vote, I think, on a clean bill, from what I've heard here. So that one will probably pass if they do it that way. And you never know until you see what the details are. But and then Emmer, he's also the state chair, the Minnesota state chair of Trump's campaign, which isn't going so well in Minnesota right now. So. And he also served with Walz when Walz was the first district congressperson. So, I don't know who came up with this idea, but, I'm not so sure that he would be the best choice. And then I also heard that Pete Buttigieg is going to be playing JD Vance to prep Walz on the debate. So, if you're putting Emmer up against Buttigieg, who's going to win that one? Well, I think Buttigieg has got that one pretty solid. So I'm going to go with Buttigieg and Walz, prevailing in this debate. Of course, I was going to do that anyway. If you ever listen to JD Vance, it's not hard to like a few minutes in, you're like, what is he talking about? He's just getting as bad as Trump. So anyway, that's going to be an interesting debate. I'm really looking forward to doing that. One of the things Emmer is kind of famous for is that he did vote against the certification of the election in 2020 because of this voter fraud and voter, and abuse. And he actually signed on to some of the lawsuits that challenged the results, and they lost them all. So I have a feeling he's going to, be another loser here when he's prepping Vance. But anyway, that's another Minnesota twist to the vice presidential debate, besides Tim Walz, being the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats. So, second thing that kind of jumped out to me involves the state of Nebraska, where Lindsey Graham paid him a visit lately. And this is what is going on. And this involves the Electoral College that I talked about earlier. So, Nebraska is, along with Maine, at least Maine right now, I think Maine might change theirs in the future, but at least for this election, these are the only two states who award Electoral College votes by who wins the congressional districts, not the statewide vote. So down in Nebraska, where Omaha is, which is one of the, if not the biggest city in Nebraska, I'm not so sure about that, but it's one of the biggest at least, if not the biggest. Biden won that area in 2020. Now, Trump won it in 2016, but I think it's one of those areas where you're, in the bigger cities, the Democrats are, taking over more, so to speak. So Lindsey Graham was down there trying to get the Nebraska legislature to change their rules so that whoever wins the state election wins all of the Electoral College votes. So they're trying to take potentially at least one Electoral College vote away from the Democrats. At least that's a possibility. And, because if you listen to some of the pundits, they're saying, well, that one Electoral College vote might decide the election, which I don't think it is. But, the media likes to play these games. So, you hear all this stuff. But, Lindsey Graham was down there. And it almost happened. So, one of the Republican state senators there said, no, I'm not going to do it. So by doing that, he is basically preventing a vote on there because now the Democrats could filibuster it so that the vote doesn't happen. So this state senator said no, and this is one of the state senators. He represents South Omaha in the Nebraska legislature. So, and he's a Republican now. I think he used to be a Democrat, but then he changed to be a Republican. But he's standing in the way. So this is another, similar to the 2020 election where, one Republican is standing up for, democracy. Now, that doesn't mean that Nebraska won't change it later. And they very well may before the next election for president. But here's what he said. Here's the reasons that he gave. There's mainly four. Is by coming to Omaha, Tim Walz was there already. And he said that it's going to make the Omaha area more relevant in the election because, if they did a winner-take-all for the state, the Republicans are going to win comfortably in Nebraska probably, so nobody's going to go to Omaha is part of his argument, right? So it's still, more relevant to the election for president. His second reason is, it helps the economy. With the campaigns coming in and, more people attending rallies and all that stuff, that's going to help the economy of Omaha, which he's trying to, help out his constituents. Third reason is he wants the candidates to work for their votes, which, that makes sense too. It's like this is what a democracy is supposed to be about, working for everybody's votes. And then his last reason is that, at least as of the date that he did this, so this is prior to my taping the show today, is that 42 days were left before the election, and he's like, nah, that's not enough time. That's too short of a time to make this big change in Nebraska law. Plus, he wants the people to vote on making this change during a midterm election rather than during a presidential election. So 2 years from now, they might be back, and having the people of Nebraska vote on it, if he gets his way. Not saying that he will, but if he does, the people of Nebraska will have a chance to vote on this change if it happens. But at least for now, in the 2024 presidential election, it's still by congressional districts, and the Democrats have a shot at winning that one in the Omaha area. So, not surprisingly, this guy's gotten death threats, from the Trumpies. So, let's hope nothing, happens to him. But at least for now, maybe he'll, of course they're making these threats to try and get him to change his mind. And I guess there's still a time that he might change his mind, but let's hope not. He's pretty, at least the stuff that I saw, interviews of his, he's not going to change his mind. At least that's what he said, so we'll see. Third thing this just happened yesterday. Is that, and this involves law a little bit. So in Ohio, we've talked before about how JD Vance and Donald Trump are going after the Haitian immigrants who apparently eat dogs and cats of their neighbors, right, in Springfield, Ohio, which is all bogus. It's all a lie. JD Vance even admits that he created this, right, and the governor of Ohio, who's a Republican, and the mayor in this city had basically said this is a lie. But Vance and Trump keep pushing this. Well, a Haitian group, is now asking a judge in Clark County, Ohio, to issue arrest warrants for Vance and Trump. So when I first heard this, I'm going, well, how are they going to do that? But many states have this a sort of a law that goes like this. So in Ohio, it's called Section 2935.09 under the Ohio Revised Code, which allows private citizens who have knowledge of the facts of a crime, they can seek to cause the arrest or the prosecution of a person. So some states have this law where, like, if the prosecutor declines to charge somebody, a victim can try and do it. So in Ohio, they have this law where the victim, or at least the private citizens who have knowledge of the facts, can file an affidavit. This is a sworn legal document. They put in the facts in there, and then they put in what charges they want these people charged with. And then this is filed with the clerk of court, which this group has done. And this is it's called the Haitian Bridge Alliance is the name of this group that's doing this. So they file this affidavit with the clerk of court, which they've done, and then the clerk hands it off to what's called a reviewing official. And then they review it to determine if the complaint should be turned over to the prosecuting attorney, or whether a judge should just do it him or herself. So a reviewing official means a judge, the prosecuting attorney, or a magistrate, which is kind of like a judge. So in this case, the Haitian Bridge Alliance is asking that the judge be the reviewing official, since the prosecutor hasn't done anything yet, and probably won't. So that, assuming that this happens, the judge looks it over, and then the judge can dismiss it if they don't think it's filed in good faith, or if they don't think there's any merit to the affidavit. But if the judge thinks there is, a judge could issue a warrant for arrest if there's a felony charge, and they are charging felonies here. Or they can refer the matter to the prosecuting attorney or for an investigation. Or what the plaintiffs are asking for here is that a judge, just the judge, holds a hearing to see if there's probable cause to satisfy the charges. So this Haitian group has filed the affidavit, and they have a lawyer, and they're asking for 5 different charges. So, and they're basing this affidavit on, I'll give you the charges here in a minute, but, there's been 33 bomb threats in that town. They've had to close some schools for some days. They've had to close some government buildings because of these threats. Vance has admitted on CNN he created this story, and Trump, repeated the lie during the debate, and he's still doing it in all of his rallies, despite the fact that there's no evidence of this. And they're calling all these Haitians illegals, when the facts are that they are here on a temporary protected status, which allows them to be here legally. So here are the 5 charges that they're asking for. One is disrupting public service, and this is a felony which relates to the bomb threats. Making false alarms, which is spreading the lies that cause alarm in the community. And depending on the severity of the facts, it can be a misdemeanor up to a felony. Telecommunications harassment is the third one. This is a misdemeanor where this one involves lying during the debates, lying at the rallies, or lying during the interviews and on social media. The fourth one is aggravated menacing, where, again, it can be a misdemeanor up to a felony depending on the severity. And they're arguing here that these lies have caused harm to people, and they knew that making these statements would cause abuse, threaten, or harass victims. Plus, they're threatening to deport all these people too, and they're by their words they're saying that people might harm the Haitians physically. So that's the fourth count. The fifth count is then complicity, where they are conspiring with others and causing an innocent or an irresponsible person to be part of the various crimes being committed. So this is basically a conspiracy charge. So they're going to run into First Amendment problems here, though, because of free speech. And, Trump and Vance didn't make the bomb threats, but, they did, give some of the words to encourage it. So that's going to be the issue, I think, here. That if the judge even hears their case, I don't even know if he's going to, because he just may find, there's no facts to support these charges. So especially if the judge is a Republican. The Republicans have Ohio, so it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't do it. But, maybe he'll have a hearing. Because, the city officials, the governor, they're all saying this is false, and they're still saying it. So even there, the mayor has received death threats. So that'll be it for this segment. I'll come back and talk about some more political things going on. So we'll talk to you on the other side.
Those crazy nights I do remember in my youth.
Welcome back to AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, for the final segment in today's show for Politics Matters, How Civics Law and Politics Affect You. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. So we're back here with talking about some more political things. So, in another, I've kind of started doing some of this where I talk about, well, what are Republicans doing now again? So here's another one. And I think older people should pay close attention to this in particular, because the Republicans, now this is at the national level and presumably at the state level too, they want to raise your drug prices. Yeah, you heard that right. They want to raise drug prices by getting rid of the provision in the Inflation Reduction Act, that Biden and the Democrats passed in his, the first 2 years, that allowed Medicare to negotiate drug prices, and that's on 10 drugs at the moment, but there's more in the future under that act. And this is the act that set the $35 a month for Medicare people, a cap on insulin. So the Republicans want to get rid of this. So, which, here again, you got like, why are you doing that? Are you trying to get rid of older people's votes? So here's my plea to older people. Even if you're a Republican, right? Are you really happy? Are you going to be happy if the Republicans win and do this to you? Okay, are you going to vote Republican knowing that this is going to happen? Okay, because this is going to affect your pocketbook. You think drug prices are high now? You wait to see what happens if they get rid of this. The drug companies are going to raise them even higher. They're going to gouge you even more. So this is going to affect people, especially those of you on a limited income or just on Social Security, which isn't really enough to retire on. But this is going to be a big deal if the Republicans win and do this. So if they take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they are going to do this. So keep that in mind when you're deciding on who you're going to vote for, because if you're a Republican, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be paying more money. So why is this going on? Well, of course, Big Pharma, the drug companies, give literally millions of dollars to the Republican Party, the pro-business party, right, to do this sort of thing. Now, there's also Democrats who get some money from Big Pharma, too, so let's not kid ourselves here. But this is what the Republican Party has said that they're going to try and do. This is one of their platforms they're running on. And have you heard the press talking about this at all? I happen to catch it, but it's not like it's all over, in the newspapers or it's all over, TV or anything. They're not talking about this, which, of course, the Republicans really like and Big Pharma really likes. Right? Nobody's going to hold them accountable, so they keep doing this. So this is another example of the Republican Party, not surprisingly, going for the business side of things rather than the people side of things. So those of you are like, oh, no, I can't vote for a Democrat because, they're going to raise my taxes or whatever, right? Even though they're not. Unless you make over $400,000, then they might. But this is another example of how the Republican Party claims to be the party, of the working class and the working people, and this is what they're going to do to you if they win. So, speaking of early voting, I think I talked about this last time, where now you can early vote in Minnesota. It started on September 20th. So just a reminder about that. And it goes until the day before the election. You can vote early. You can do it in person. You can do it by mail. You can request an absentee ballot. Depending on where you live, like I go to my city hall where I can vote early. If you're out in the more rural areas, you can go to your county election board area. Some part of your county building is where you can go vote. So get out there and do it. If for no other reason, right, you don't have to wait in line. If there's a big line where you go. When I've early voted, very rarely have I had to wait at all. Maybe a couple people ahead of me. Right, so it's really, really quick and easy, which is one reason why I do it. So if you're not registered, it's really simple to do that. You can go to the Minnesota Secretary of State's website. You can register online. Or you can register at your county election board area. Or you can register the date of the election in Minnesota. Just make sure you bring along some ID to show who you are and your address, that type of thing. So if you're not registered, get to it. Want to make sure you are. There's, I believe in Minnesota you can register up till I think it's 20 days before the election. Then you gotta do it on election day if you're not registered. So get to that if you haven't done that yet. Another thing that has happened recently is 2 women have died in Georgia because doctors wouldn't treat them because they feared that they would violate Georgia's restrictive abortion laws and go to jail. So there's been a state review board that has looked at a couple deaths from I think it was 2022 in Georgia where they have concluded that they went to get medical help and the doctor said, I can't do it. You're not sick enough yet. Under Georgia's restrictive abortion right laws. So they didn't treat them right away, and then they ultimately died. 2 people, at least in that year. And this review board has ruled that these were preventable deaths. So you got all those Republicans running around saying, well, show us the people that have died, out in the parking lots and stuff. Well, here's 2. I don't know if they died in the parking lots, but here's 2 that the Georgia Medical Board, the State Review Board, has said were preventable deaths because of this Georgia changing their laws. I have a feeling there's more than this around the country. And both of these women left kids behind. So this is another one of these false things that goes on where people well, it's usually these young people who have unprotected sex, and they don't have any kids, and then they just want to, I'll have an abortion. Most of the time, it is women who have already had kids that want an abortion. Or, in this case, they had medical issues, both of them did. So, and then they wanted to get an abortion, and they were denied, and now they're dead. So I have a feeling that these families are going to be suing the out of the hospital and maybe try and sue the state of Georgia somehow, although, they're going to claim sovereign immunity where you can't sue the state. But, the hospital is probably going to get sued. So, thanks to the Supreme Court for doing this. So we got two dead people in Georgia, but I'm sure there's more than that around here. So, and plus, let's not forget that the Senate recently, United States Senate, voted against, the Republicans at least, voted against a bill allowing IVF treatment. So the Democrats could not overcome the filibuster. So it's not going to be voted on. Even though Donald Trump's running around now saying, the government's going to pay for your IVF because we like babies. But yet the Republicans, of course, voted it down. They're not going to allow this. So all this stuff about, we like kids and all this, well, apparently not. Something that I just heard today, so I don't have all the details here, but it's interesting nonetheless, is you hear all the time about, and Harris brought this up during the debate, is you get all these people going to the Trump rallies and then you're seeing them leave. Well, why are they doing this? Well, now the media that has shown up at the debate, at least some of them, have now started asking these people who are leaving, like, why are you leaving? So here's what some of them have been saying, is that they are paid to show up for at least 10 minutes, take a few pictures, and then they can go and they get their money. So here we go again with Trump literally paying people to go to his rallies. Now, what I'll be interested to hear is some of these press people said, well, would you go anyway if you weren't getting paid? Right? I wonder, since these people leave pretty quickly, I wonder if they would even show up. But this is what's going on at his rallies, and a lot of people were suspecting this was going on. But now, at least for some of the people, it's been verified that, they're getting paid. They stay there 10 minutes and then they leave. And if they got to stand in line all this time, then they must be getting paid. In their mind, at least enough money, right? So, I wonder if Trump comes back to Minnesota, and I don't know that he's going to, but let's assume that he does. I wonder if some, people are going to ask about, press people are going to ask, well, why are these people leaving? So we'll have to see about that. But anyway, I just thought that was just kind of confirms what a lot of people are thinking. He's still paying people to come to his rallies. So, and here's another thing. You hear Trump, and I'm sure Vance is going to say some version of this at the debate. Well, crime is just you can't go outside your door without getting shot at, right? I mean, they're talking about crime is through the roof, and I mean it's just everywhere, right? Well, no. Here's another incidence of where the Republican Party is not going to let the facts get in the way of their crappy arguments. So the crime rate have dropped in 2023. So the FBI just recently, brought out or did a report where violent crime is down 3% in 2023. Murders are down nearly 12%. Rape is down 9%. Aggravated assault, which is mainly an assault with a weapon, or you beat up somebody and injure them pretty badly, that's down 3%. And interestingly, the biggest cities where there's at least 1 million people in them, or in the area, they saw the biggest drop in violent crime, which was 7%. They saw a 7% drop. So, you hear the Republicans, yelling about, in the cities, like down here, Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's just crime everywhere, right? They keep complaining about that. Well, in the biggest cities around the country, no, the crime rate is actually going down. So I thought this was interesting, where and hopefully the Democrats will, campaign on this. That no, this isn't really the case. Taylor Swift. I talked about how after the debate where she endorsed Harris and Walz, is that over 400,000 clicked on the vote.org site. Well, between September 9th and September 12th in Minnesota, the Minnesota Secretary of State's office recorded more than 20,000 new registrations to vote. On September 12th alone, 13,000 of that occurred on that day. So, was this all due to Taylor Swift? I don't know. But some of them probably were. So imagine if this is going on in other states. Right, so there's a lot of elections decided by less than 20,000 votes. And if a lot of these people vote for Democrats, that's going to be a good thing on these elections across the country. So, again, get registered if you haven't already. So, I'm going to end here. Talk to you next week. We'll keep going on through the Constitution and probably talk about the debate. So, we'll talk to you then.